everyone, and welcome to episode 38 of the History Hotline. My name is Deanna Lynn Cook, and I will be your host today, as always. We will be talking about some wonderful things, some juicy things, and I felt like I could not do it without a special guest, so I would like to welcome Montel Gordon
Hello.
to the History Hotline today. He will be with us as we look at our theme, I think, for the next few episodes called Protesting Racism. It's all about the uprisings, the race riots, the protests that we've seen historically in this country, and looking at it in a modern context as well, because, you know, what's the point of history if we can't apply it to the life we're living today and make those connections and links? So going to, first of all, introduce Montel, and then we're going to get into the theme of the podcast and what we will be discussing. So, a quick bio and a quick introduction, just so you know what Montel's all about. He is a freelance music journalist and historian interested in African American history and culture, as well as Black British social and cultural history. He completed his undergraduate degree at the University of Nottingham in American History and Literature with a dissertation titled Hip Hop, Neo Minstrelsy, How Misogyny Corrupted Hip Hop, which sounds actually sick. So interesting. And he's currently doing his master's at the University of Warwick in modern history, specifically researching policing the crisis and the Black communities, the economic crises, and policing during the 70s and 80s. And one of the main reasons he's here today is for an article that he wrote in The Independent called Britain Has Had Decades of Protest Against Racial Injustice and We Can't Stop Now, where he explores communities of protest against racial injustices from 1981, which is where our focus will be today, to contemporary times, and looking at like Black Lives Matter and that movement that happened last summer and has continued to happen. Montel also created a music blog titled Nostalgia 99 back in May 2020. And he self-published a biannual magazine called Nostalgia 99, which sold out in actually a few days. And that is like a fantastic kind of body of work that he works on as well. So we've got the musical elements, we've got the history, we've got America, we've got Britain, we've got everything in Montel today. So okay, so before we get into the, the juice and the flesh of this episode and thinking about protesting, let's do a little quick fire round to get to know Montel, a little bit more about him, his interests in terms of history and all that good stuff. So, Montel, who would you say is your favourite historical figure?
I would have to go for W.E.B. Du Bois. Just a big fan of his work and also his activism, even though there's a little bit of, well, not a little bit, there was flaws to him as a person sometimes in a
Yeah,
way. I still, admire him, one of my favourite scholars and an inspiration in terms
definitely.
of academia.
Yeah, of course. Du Bois he's a legend, heavy hitter, I would say. Okay, so your favourite historical event?
Favorite historical event, Haitian Revolution, without a doubt, 100 million%. I feel when I learned it, when I learned about it when I was about like 14, 15, and understanding that this was like the first free Black nation, and amidst of like learning about slave trade in school and the abolition movement, it was something that kind of really revitalized my politics and also personally really kind of speared me on in a way that to learn more
Wow.
about Black history.
Yeah, no, I don't even think I was fortunate enough to know about that until I was probably like in sixth form, if not at uni. So that's like amazing that you got to learn about that so early, because it is such a fascinating event and such a kind of not life changing in that kind of way, but game changing event in the Caribbean, and how that impacted the Americas and Britain in terms of slavery, as you said. Question number 3 is your favorite historical time period or periods?
It's a tie between three different ones, all
Okay.
different between each other. So 14th, 15th century Mali, the Malian Empire, one of my
Okay.
favorite African empires to study. Harlem Renaissance. Can't even pronounce it properly, but yeah, I love
Either
the
one.
plethora. I love the plethora of works that was written in this time, and I learned about this in university in a module. And I read Quicksand, I think it was Nella Larson. And I love that book.
Yeah.
Poems from Langston Hughes as well, and just
Yeah,
like the whole kind of Cotton Club and what was going on in Harlem at the time. So that's something
definitely.
I loved. And then also Wild Card, Tudors and Stuarts. Well, more specifically, Stuarts. I love learning about Stuart Britain, and the reigns of James the First, Charles the First,
Wow.
Cromwell, the Protectorate,
Oh my
Restoration.
gosh.
It was interesting. It was interesting to go to school in sixth form when I learned about it. So
It's a very
that's
wild
something.
card.
It's a very wild card, but yeah, that's something I like to read about casually when I
Yeah.
was just,
No, I think doing it. Did you do it at A level?
yeah, I done that at A level for like
Yeah, I
2 years.
think the depth you get to go in at A level can make a lot of topics a lot more interesting than they might have been in lower school.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah, I did the tutors as well, and I did enjoy it. I wouldn't say I disliked it, even though looking back, I do find it a little bit boring. But no, I respect your choices there, definitely. And then, where would you say your interest in history began? So, was it something at school? Was it a teacher, or something else?
So yeah, like me and my dad would do. I would always just come in the room when I was watching his documentaries.
Oh,
But again, it was very always Eurocentric. You know, it was like I don't know why I would watch it. Maybe just for the sleep to it, but I'd always
yeah.
watch stuff on like a lot of Roman history, but I always loved
Okay.
that as well. Greek history, um, whitewashed Egyptologists,
Mm.
Egyptian history. I always laugh at the documentaries where they always say the aliens built the pyramids. That's something that I always laugh at. But then also, yeah, a lot of just random ones on BBC Four when they were going towards like Timbuktu, like with like Michael Palin goes on those little like journeys when
Yeah,
I was younger. So those are stuff that kind of really infatuated me, and that's how I
definitely.
kind of grew to love the history.
Yeah, that's the thing with history. It's like, if you're a historian or you're interested, there is so much you could possibly think about, whether it's a history of food in, a country that you've never been to before, or the history of music somewhere, or culture or politics. Like, history is just massive. Everything has a history. So I feel like there's always something that someone will find interesting, which is why when people say they don't like history, I know they're lying because they just haven't found their history.
Definitely, definitely. Even as you were saying, music, food, there's so much history of everything. So,
Literally. Okay, and future research interest since your, dissertation season coming to the end of all that. What are your plans for potential future work within history or not, or other kinds of research?
so when I was doing my dissertation, I talked a lot about the education system and also kind of like looking at, well, I was making links between like the colonial legacies of the education system and also now, and
Yeah.
also I guess exclusion rates and ESNs of like
Mm,
black kids in like the 70s and 80s and the 60s. And then now I feel like I'm moving more into like the field of sociology. I like to bring in a lot of
okay.
contemporary stuff. So
Yeah.
I feel I want to look at like school as a potential pipeline to the prison industry for like a lot of
Mm,
inner
yeah.
city black kids in Britain. That's something that's not really being spoke about in academia. So hopefully I can bring something new to the table. So that's my
Definitely.
plans for the future.
Sounds good. And I think coming at that with a historical context, as you said, looking at the colonial education system, ESN schools in the like 60s and 70s, that all is a backdrop for what's happening now with PRUs and exclusion rates. And as you said, the school to prison pipeline or the exclusion to prison pipeline. So definitely wishing you all the best for that future research. Feel like you could still keep that historical if you really wanted to. No?
Yeah, definitely keep it a lot historical. I'm toying. I don't know. I'm toying between between
Yeah.
history or sociology, but
Yeah.
hopefully I make up my decision soon.
Yeah, well, I feel like you've got time. So whenever, and also I think there won't be any wasted research if you start something in sociology or history. It all links back anyway, because as we said, everything has a history, so it wouldn't be time wasted at all.
Most definitely, most definitely.
Thinking about our theme now, it's going to sound a bit silly as I am in charge of this podcast and it is literally only me, but I haven't decided whether this is going to be a series or this is going to be a standalone episode. I think there'll be a series, but I don't think it will be a long one. But I do want to think about protesting racism and protests in the UK, but especially kind of protests within the Black community, anti racist protests that are kind of rooted in Blackness and Black people kind of fighting for their rights in different ways. And you've written an article that was published in The Independent titled Britain has had decades of protest against racial injustice, which it has, and we can't stop now. And I just wanted to get maybe your thoughts as to, well, why did you write the article? What kind of spurred you on, or what led you to think about this kind of long history of protests in this country?
So yeah, I was writing my dissertation, and I seen one of the editors putting on Twitter that they were taking submissions for articles, and I thought since it was 40th anniversary since the
Yeah,
uprising in 1981, I thought and me do my dissertation on the topic as well. I thought it would be a perfect time for me to, I guess, share some of the work that I've been doing and just put it onto a grander scale. But also on top of that, I also noticed the continuities between 1981 and 2020 with the protest now.
definitely.
So I thought a lot of people may not know. about what happened in 1981. And as I ended the article, I said, until the lions have their own historians, the story of the
Mm,
hunt will always favor the hunter, you know. And I
yeah,
guess a lot of our history gets lost for some
absolutely.
reason, unless you've had a family member or an uncle, or I guess an uncle family friend that was kind of involved in that. No one really speaks about it, you know. That's something that
Definitely.
I've really noticed about. So I think it's time that we kind of regain our own history and talk a lot about what was being happening in Britain, you know.
Yeah,
We always
definitely.
just we always feel like for some reason like it was all rainbows and sunshines when our grandparents came in the Wimbush generation, you know, and it was, which certainly, as we know, was not the case. So I
Yeah.
think it's time we really talk about what was really going on, what was really happening.
I agree, definitely. I think you're onto something there, especially with looking at the kind of long histories and also this idea that, there's been a history of protest in this country, and Black people have been fighting, and this history has not been widely spoken about, which we know because, you know, doing history at university level and at master's level, you really have to fight to find kind of the lecturers that can support you and a place for you to do this kind of research within a lot of institutions that don't even at this point have departments for Black British history or enough academics to support the maybe potential number of students that would like to study this. This is kind of changing a little bit now, but I'm sure your experience in higher education will kind of talk to that as well.
I was blessed in the way
Yeah.
when I was choosing my kind of when I was choosing where I wanted to do my masters.
Mm,
I always look first at like the academic interests of a lot of the professors there, and
yeah.
luckily, the supervisor I took wrote a book on this topic that I was doing my dissertation on, and his
Fantastic.
book was amazing. Shout out to Dr. Simon Peplow, Race and Rights and
Yeah.
Factory Sport, and
Yeah. He's
shamelessly
super
plugging him.
talented.
So yeah, he
No,
wrote the most
definitely.
amazing book on it. So, and if I never had him, I don't think I would have had anyone else to supervise my topic at the university. And I think particularly for like a lot of the top most degree institutions, you really find it difficult to find someone that really specializes in Black British history. And I think a lot of it's very Eurocentric. And again, I feel maybe it's time that we have more scholars that appeal to this kind of to this history as well,
Yeah.
because there's a growing interest, of course. So yeah, it's very difficult, I feel, for Black kids and going into academia to try and have those people that specialize in these fields. But
Yeah.
hopefully, fingers crossed, change will come.
Definitely, definitely. And yeah, as you said, you were definitely blessed with Simon Peffler at Warwick. Definitely. I think at this point, I'm just going to explain to listeners what was happening in 1981 with these riots, because I think we're going to reference them a lot.
Hmm.
And just for anyone that needs that context. So, pretty much from April to July 1981, there were what are often called race riots. However, I think it's a bit of a problematic term in a way. I would say that a better term might be protests, and it's why I've said protesting racism is going to be the title. Although if you ever kind of read about them, they'll probably be known as the 1981 race riots. So don't be confused looking for protests when that's not what they were called historically. And they were basically related to racial tensions and inner city deprivation across many different cities. So not just London, not just Birmingham, as we've mentioned, but in the north as well. Brixton being one of the main places in London and Tottenham. You've got Toxteth in Liverpool, you've got Chapeltown in Leeds, Moss Side in Manchester, Handsworth in Birmingham. And these kind of happened from April to July. So very similar to what we saw in 2011 over that summer after Mark Duggan was killed. You've got a series of riots hitting inner cities where there is a lot of poverty and a lot of deprivation and a lot of political and racial tension because of the way the police are treating Black people primarily. But I think, and I don't know if you'll agree with me, Montel, just like in 2020, where we kind of stopped and protests in the wake of George Floyd being murdered, it wasn't just about George Floyd. I don't think anyone that took to the streets in England just protested George Floyd. And many of the signs were saying, the UK is racist too, the UK is just as complicit. It was never just about America. And I think that's an important point to draw on when we think about kind of the fact that whilst the police and their brutality can aggravate protests, it's never just that, and the depravity and the poverty that was kind of seen in the 1980s, where you've got Margaret Thatcher as prime minister. It's very similar to, I think, the suffering people going through in 2020, maybe because of the pandemic, maybe because austerity, maybe because of the Tories, or a whole host of things. Sorry, I've said a lot there. I don't know if you want to pick up on any of those points.
Yeah, you made like a lot of interesting points, especially when
Oh,
you're talking
thank
about
you.
like the BLM stuff in what was going on. If you look on actually, if people went to the protest and looked at the signs, they were mentioning
Mm,
a wide name of a wide range of people's names. The UK is not
yeah.
innocent, of course, not innocent. I feel people just thought that when we went to these protests, we were just protesting about George Floyd. When in fact
Mm-hmm.
that is actually part of the reason, but also we're looking at the whole system of racism itself and how
Yeah,
racism is manifested through the Metropolitan Police. If you
definitely.
guys have a chance, I would recommend looking at the Institute of Race Relations, where they've got two
Yeah.
amazing pamphlets. They've got police in the black community, and there's another one. I think the one published in 1987. This has like over like 200 different case studies of police racism, whether that's on the streets, in the station, at the schools, even going to churches and large group meetings. So again,
Mm-hmm.
like people have to understand that the issue of the black community with the police is not just it's not just a lived experience, it's a learned experience as well that we learn
Yeah,
about people that have been able to acquire a lot of these knowledge and these understanding about police racism.
definitely.
But yeah,
Absolutely.
even as we're talking about with the poverty and deprivation, that was probably one of the underlying issues again with the uprising of 1981. You have the recession that emerged from 1974 that kind of decimated a lot of the Western economies, and as I was talking about in the with the school to prison pipeline as well. A lot of the black youths kind of left school with a little economic opportunities, and
Yep.
they go into these jobs, these what you call it like factory jobs, and then
Mm-hmm.
when the recession happened, they kind of lose their jobs as you can go to China now to get cheaper products rather than
Yep.
paying someone whole heap of money in Britain. Well, not even whole heap of money, but you get the point.
Mm, yeah,
So
more.
now that kind of creates what this kind of underclass or what Marx kind of talks about this kind of this lumpen proletariat, but we can look at it in a black perspective, this black underclass now. So we got like poverty, we got deprivation, we got high youth unemployment, evidently rise of crime. So this kind of brings in this over policing of the black community, and evidently now we have the uprisings that kind of emerged while starting Brixton, but also spread to Moss Side, spread to Handsworth, and then Liverpool, which is another underrated kind of case study with Toxie.
Yeah.
If you look at like Liverpool have a deep history taken back from slavery. That was probably one of the leading slave ports
Mm,
in
true.
Britain. And also the superintendent was a very racist individual. I think his name was Ken Anderson. And I remember
Mm-hmm.
he was in my dissertation, I was looking at him, where he was saying something, a wild statement like the inhabitants of Liverpool, well, the half caste as he called them, were products of the black seamen and prostitutes mixing.
Oh gosh.
And yeah,
Yeah.
Toxic was that was one where kind of race where you see kind of race and class intersect with each other because those kind of race riots, like the uprisings, they were kind of interracial where we see like the black and the kind of the white people uprising against police as well, and also
Yeah,
against the state and Thatcher what she was
definitely.
doing.
Of course, yeah, and interestingly enough as well, because 1919 were the riots after World War One in Liverpool at the ports, because police were disproportionately targeting black ex-servicemen who were seamen, and because they couldn't get work after war, and they were trying to deport them back, but they were kind of trying to find work, and it all kind of kicked off. There's an episode on that if you want to know more about 1919. But yeah, I guess again within that one city, you've got this history of uprising and protest in regards to race and racism. So yes, it's very interesting that we have kind of all these options kind of to choose and pick from when we're thinking about this history. Definitely, and I like your idea and your sorry your observation of the black underclass being created as a result of poverty, because I feel like in that time period, when we think about race and class, we forget that they intersect, and not all Black people necessarily would be of that underclass. However, that's not necessarily the way that we're perceived by society and the police, who would then target all individuals of a certain race.
Definitely, definitely. That was something that kind of when I learned about the kind of the black underclass, that's something that kind of Stuart Hall talks a lot about in Police and the Crisis.
Yeah,
That book there, he kind of goes in depth about kind of this kind of black underclass that kind of emerged from the recession. And also, who else kind of talked about that? I think there's people like John Solomon, who again,
yeah.
amazing scholar. But yeah, Gus John. But Stuart Hall,
Oh
kind of
yeah,
the
of
one of the
course.
first people that kind of talked about kind of looked at kind of this lumpen proletariat and embedded it into a Black British perspective.
Definitely. Definitely. Great points made there as well. Right, let's move on to our next point then. And let's think about protesting, maybe in a little bit more of a modern context. And also to pull upon a point that you mentioned, with this idea that when we were protesting, say in 2020, with the trigger being George Floyd's murder, um, we kind of, and this is a point that David Olusoga made in an article in The Guardian, I think, a few weeks ago. He said that we were kind of spurred on in Britain, as Black people or as white anti-racists, or other races as well, of course, and we understood that the same systems that led to George Floyd's death were the same systems that could lead to a Black man, being killed in a similar or the same way in this country, which we've seen in this history in Black men and women. And so kind of maybe what are your thoughts on that? This idea of, yes, we're focusing on America in a modern context, but as you've mentioned, the systems are at play there. Well, they're British systems in the first instance, and they are still at play in this country as well.
Yeah, and it's like I think we undermine our issues of like police brutality in what's happened in Britain. You know, we
Mm.
can go back to David Aluwale in 1969
Oh
in Leeds
gosh.
when the police, how the police did that. We can look at Cynthia Jarrett, where the police kind of caused that heart attack, where the police officer
Hmm.
pushed a she's like 50-year-old Black woman to the floor and
Yeah.
causing her to have a heart attack and pass away. There's so much different case studies, and again,
Honestly.
when we look at George Floyd, I feel as a diaspora we all kind of mourned for our kind of African American brothers and sisters, and it's even
Hmm.
just so humane how you can just see an officer put his knee to this Black person's neck for
Yeah.
8 minutes while he's just screaming for help.
Mm.
I think
Yeah.
I don't know. It's just really hard to put into words. But it was a
Definitely.
difficult time, on just social media, just seeing that all the time and just seeing all these issues being amplified. But I think now it's really good to see how a lot of people are learning about British history,
Yeah.
and
Definitely.
it's all coming to light now, like a lot of
I
stuff that's
agree.
gone on in the past with Britain.
Definitely. I like the way that, although it sounds weird that a movement that started with police brutality in America has led to things like the Black curriculum being so popular as like a social organization, in terms of getting Black history on the curriculum, Black British history. And this podcast, like, I don't know if I did this podcast before 2020 May, if anybody would listen to it in the same way that they do now. Let's be honest, the cry for this history wasn't there before, and all these appointments being made by universities for lecturers in Black British history, Caribbean history, and African history, I feel like that is a direct kind of cause. So as much as those protests in a way kind of felt very tokenistic at the time, and in the kind of aftermath, and some of the corporate statements that were made just kind of were ridiculous, because one day they'd make a racially insensitive comment or post, and then the next day they were, oh, we support Black Lives Matter and take 20% off. And
Oh
yeah,
my
it
god.
just, yeah, there was a lot of that. And I think kind of picking through all that crap, for want of a better word, to kind of find the gems and the organizations that are now thriving because of that interest in being an active anti-racist, that has been, I think, probably one of the best things to come out of that. Also, I find it weird. I don't know if it's just me. I feel like I see a lot more Black people on telly, in adverts, in
Yeah,
shows, and
just having that conversation yesterday as well in one of
it's
my
strange, right? It's not just me.
honestly, like it's I don't know whether that's come from that or whatnot ever, but I don't know. One thing I can say, one of the good things I think personally from the BLM stuff feels like I kind of, even though I studied history and literature, I started to read a lot
Yeah.
more, and I
Mm,
think I just with my master's loan as well, I just built a library, so I bought like
yeah.
over like 200 books just ran from like bookstores,
Wow.
thrift stores, and Amazon. And a
Yeah,
lot of books really kind of changed me and changed my perspective on kind of Black British history. I remember reading
definitely.
Peter Fryer, probably my favorite historian now,
Oh,
um,
best book ever.
Staying in Power. And it was like the
Oh,
first line where he goes,
yep.
Black people in Britain before the English came. And then he kind of traces it
Mm-hmm.
back to the Roman periods. And then also
Third
now when you look at
century.
when you look at, I guess, when we learn Tudors or when we learn Stuart history or when we learn Georgian history, there's a lot you can
Mm,
coincide like what was Black people in Britain in those times there now.
Yep.
Black Tudors, which shout out, I can't pronounce her last name, Miranda.
Oh, Miranda
But
Kaufman.
yeah, her book is
Yeah.
amazing. You can Which took like Black Tudors up until 1596 when they were expelled
Yeah.
or kind of restricted by the Privy Council,
It's
by Queen
insane.
Elizabeth, and also after the American independence, after the American War of Independence, there were around about a couple thousand African refugees because they were promised
Mm.
freedom if they fought in the American independence. They lost the war
Yep.
and they were in Britain, and then this is where you kind of have the kind of repatriation system comes into place, where you have like a lot of Africans that were sent back to Sierra Leone.
Yeah.
um, but yeah, there's a lot of history of Black people in Britain, a lot of Black people in Europe as well, which
Definitely.
is kind of undermined, and I guess history's just becoming so Eurocentric and whitewash over the times. But
Mhm.
I'm happy to see that we're having a new generation of skilled and trained historians that are here to document our history. That's a beautiful
Yeah.
thing to see, and probably that's
Definitely.
probably the only good thing that's probably happened out of BLM is that people are taking a notice to this stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I would definitely agree with that. It is obviously one of the best things, and maybe because we're in this discipline, but I'm sure other people in other fields or disciplines might feel a similar way about what's happening in their industry. And I hope that's the case. It's not just within history, although I think history is such a huge tool of kind of shaping society and the things that we uphold within British society as being important or being right. And all these statues, and as much as people say, "Oh, it's just statues; it's not that deep." Well, it is an indication of what society upholds as good or truthful or honest or brave. And so, yeah, I think reevaluating that is fantastic for me, and I'm happy that, like, year 7 or 8 student that had to sit in like a lesson of slavery, and everyone was kind of staring at me because I was one of the only Black people, and people were talking about how good the British Empire was because it managed to conquer all these countries, and it's such a small island, and I was just kind of vomiting in my mouth in that lesson at age like 12. I feel like that little girl is happy that we were at this point, and obviously sad that it took such like brutal violence towards Black people for it to happen. Um, but I guess we're here now in a way, and we have to seize this opportunity to keep educating people. Why? Which is why I've got people like you on this podcast to keep sharing these stories. So continue, keep
Thank
going.
you, thank you. But even so, like the point you made about, I had to just laugh there when you're talking about like the slavery in year 8, because I feel like
Oh yeah,
the same. I feel like I was the same as well. Like when you learn about these things in year 8, and even myself, I just feel like I had this colonial mentality when I was younger. It was like I was so proud of the British Empire that we were able to
mm,
amass 22% of the globe. The
right,
sun where the sun never sets, and how it's taught as well. You just think that everyone wanted to be British, that we went, and there was no bloodshed, there was no murder, there was no rape, there was no
mm,
pillaging, there was no genocide
yep,
attached to it as well. And remember, there was a YouGov poll that
yeah,
stated that
that's the
six
one.
percent of British people are proud of the empire.
Ah,
Look how
ah.
look how Churchill's painted. Look how Churchill's praised.
Exactly.
Churchill's government's praised as well. We look at Churchill and it's always like he won us the war.
Gosh.
Soldiers that fought. You know what I mean? The folks that won the war.
Mm-hmm.
And even so, like I remember in my history class, in my master's class, actually, we're having an argument with someone about how World War II is taught as just Britain fighting, and he was like,
Yeah.
"No, it's not. It's the Empire." I was like, in schools, it's
Yeah.
taught as just Britain,
Exactly.
but when you actually read historical books, obviously by a lot of historians of the Second World War, they'll obviously talk about the British Empire, the French Empire,
Mm-hmm.
and all these stuff there. But you
Yeah.
have to think, not the average Joe is not going to read
No.
not
Exactly.
deep books on World War II. So understandably, it's going to be alien to them to think that it was just Britain, that it was just this one island that fought against Germans,
Yeah. Of
Italians,
course.
the Japanese. Of course, it was a collaborative effort. Hence why it's called World War, because it was
Yeah.
it was
Definitely.
fought by people across the world
The
and in
world.
the empires as well.
Yeah, it
It's,
just blows your mind. But I don't know. I think that with that, I don't know if I feel like academics have more of a responsibility to disseminate their work into the public. And I don't know whose fault that is. If it because the average Joe isn't reading them books and they need to, in my opinion. And this is why I love David Olusoga so much for his documentaries, because the average
mm,
person isn't going to pick up Black and British and read through 600 pages of Black British history, and that's fine. People don't have time. But his documentaries, got the views in. Steve McQueen's Small Axe series got the views in. I just feel like we need more of the kind of public education, because I think that's the kind of only way to change things within society. Like, it's all well and good in these ivory towers, these academics are publishing these articles and these books and these journal papers, but if only academics are reading them, well, of like-minded kind of opinions, then what's the point?
Yeah, here's a question I want to pose to you as well. Like,
Okay.
how do you feel about the Small Axe series? Do you feel like it may be kind of watered down in a way that you know what, I only watched the Lovers Rock one because
Yeah.
I find it hard to watch Black Trauma. So
Okay.
with the Brixton one, I kind of read about, I know about a lot about it. The
Yeah.
Mangrove one, my mentor told me it wasn't for him.
Yeah.
Well, how do you feel
Fair
about
enough.
those kind of documentaries? Did you feel it was an accurate description, or did you feel like it was kind of watered down in a way?
So I think taking them all individually, first of all, because the Mangrove 9 one for me was sensational. I think, and having done extensive research on it, there were just the way that the character they'd kind of, I think it was, and I give credit to the actors, the way that they had researched the characters that they were playing. Like Darcus Howe was phenomenal, and Althea Jones, LaQuaint as well. The way that they were portrayed,
Mm,
and even some of the small things that they did or said, or their idiosyncrasies were caught really well. From me having, I'm a big fan of Darcus Howe. I've literally, any interview he's done, I've probably watched it, and even down to
yeah.
kind of some of the speeches, it was just sensational. But obviously, it's a drama. So I think, me personally, I think I watch a lot of historical dramas, like all the slavery films, 12 Years a Slave. I hate them, but I will always watch them. I don't know why. I just kind of, maybe I am addicted to trauma. It's as horrible as it sounds, as terrible as it is. But I think growing up as well, that was kind of the only injection of blackness you got in the cinema at one point,
Hmm.
outside of like the comedies of the like 90s and early 2000s. So I have time for them and I will watch them. I'm very critical of them, but I really like the Mangrove 9 one. The Lovers Rock one, my aunties in the group chat slated it from the first second of it, because they were like, this is not what it was like. And obviously they were there. I can't tell them anything. I wasn't
So
there.
I'm
I
saying,
wasn't even a thought. So yeah, they had a few more problems with that. And I don't think I liked that episode as well. They argued the focus on Janet Kay's silly games was a bit not random, but it didn't really fit the actual time.
yeah.
That song, but then I was like, oh, maybe it was licensing laws. Maybe they couldn't get something else. I don't know. I think that episode drew in too many different random things. There was like a moment of potential sexual abuse. There were moments of like religion not making sense too much in regards to the Lovers Rock scene. I don't know. That there was too much for me in that one. I wasn't a fan. The Leroy Logan one, the police one, I did a podcast episode on that. I liked it to an extent. I didn't rate the accents. I just don't. Just feel like the Jamaican accent is an acquired sound, and not many people can do it. And I just wish they would just let Jamaican people do their own accents, because no, it was a no from me. Um, that episode, I don't think it showed the trueness of Leroy Logan's life, and everything he achieved. It was too traumatic, and it didn't need to be like that. I just felt like you just wanted to upset me, and yeah, I didn't like that one. And then there was Alex Whittle.
Yeah, with
I
with the
didn't.
riots.
Yeah, I didn't. I wasn't a fan of that one either. I kind of wanted more of a focus, but I think because it's a drama, it has to focus on people and characters.
Hmm.
And I think you're right in saying it, that can detract from the actual historical narrative. So apart from the Mangrove 9 one, to be honest, I was excited to watch them, but by the time we got to the end, I was like, oh yeah. But
Yeah,
then I also saw the conversations that took place on Twitter after, with people that aren't privy to this history, and that was what got me happy.
yeah, it's good about it gets people talking in a way, and that's
Yeah.
probably one of the good things. But the Mangrove What 91, documented such a pivotal moment in Black British history. So
Mhm.
big ups to him. But again, my mom was very and my uncle was very critical over the Lovers Rock one.
Yeah.
It was like this is not accurate. As you said, it's a not accurate description as
No.
well. So yeah, they were a bit annoyed. So after that one, I kind of like lost interest in a way, in a bit.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, a lot
again,
of people did, you know.
yeah,
You're not the only person that said that. A lot of people said, "Oh, Sundays are not for small acts anymore."
so glad I'm not the
Yeah.
only one then.
No, definitely not. But it was on the BBC. It put Black British history at the forefront of people's minds on a Sunday evening. Oh,
Yeah.
sorry. which was fantastic. So I rate it, and I'm happy, and I hope that we get more opportunities to put these histories out there. Just I think I want more of our own ownership over the narratives, though. Whether that means we have to take it to a place of YouTube to create these stories and documentaries ourselves,
Hmm.
because in the mainstream they can get not necessarily whitewashed, but watered down, shall we say.
Yeah,
So that would be
absolutely.
maybe an interesting thing for the future as we kind of move away from mainstream TV anyway.
Most
Right.
definitely.
Let us get back to the police. Although the Mangrove 9 episode was definitely an element of, institutional racism and just general police prejudice and discrimination. The amount of kind of points in that way you just saw policing at its worst, but obviously what I would say is it's normal, um, was very interesting to me. I think a point I had was that policing, and poor policing, the over policing of Black people as suspects and the under protection of them as victims, which is I think Maureen Kane has in her Society and the Policeman's Role, which she published in 1973. Very underrated text. They're a common trigger for protests in this country, where we're thinking about 1981 or even as far back as 1919, and even in 2020. As you mentioned, the names on people's placards at these protests in 2020 were not just American names, Mark Duggan, Simeon Francis, Sarah Reid, Maggie Powell, Kingsley Burrell, Cynthia Jarrett, of course, David Oluwale from, 1969. Their names were all there. And so, why do you think policing is a trigger? Is it because someone has lost their life, or do you think it's something else? Because when I think about, sorry, just to say the Windrush deportations and deportations now, they don't pull crowds like that when it comes to protesting.
I think it's the issue, and it's like who's protecting us from the people
Mm,
that's meant to protect us in a
right.
way. And it's like you have this system that's put in place of police and that's meant to protect the masses, where
Mm,
instead they become a system of oppression that we found
absolutely.
like, historically the black community. When you look at the causes of the 1981 riots or the uprising in 1981, what do you have? You have the special patrol group.
Yeah,
You have Swamp 81,
of
where they literally
course.
swamped into the black community and they were just stopping and searching every black person they could find, thinking that they was a mugger, thinking they were a thief,
Mm,
thinking they
yep.
was a drug dealer, or so on and so forth. So it's like
Yep.
when you look at what they've done historically, and I guess what they continue to do. I remember Guardian article reported that well, black people are 40 times more likely to be stopped and searched in London than white people, and even Carissa
Wow.
Dick
Yeah.
alluded to the point that there's so much damage done that there's no able you know it's beyond repair with the black
Yeah.
community.
I think so.
It's it's like of course we're gonna just protest. Of course we're going
Yeah.
to, demand for change because there's nothing that's really happened. You had McPherson's inquiry in 1999 that, you know, finally,
Mm.
finally said that, finally said that,
Yep.
the police is an institutionally racist organization, and that's something that was
Absolutely.
rejected in Scarman's report, which again was rubbish. And also in the 1981, the inquiries into the 1985 uprising, so like with the Handsworth with Silverman's report as well. So once
Yeah.
again, I'm not going to sit here and say that the police is still an institution racist organization.
Mhm.
However, what I can say is McPherson said that. Well,
Mhm.
prove that. But what change has happened
Right.
22 years later? Have we
Mhm.
seen much change?
Exactly.
You can hire all these black officers, these Asian officers, but still, they still might have elements of racial prejudice as well. In a way, they
Exactly.
still might,
Because it's a system.
it's a system, exactly. It's a system as well. And I feel they're racist to the core as well. In my opinion, the
Yeah.
police are. And
Definitely.
when we go back into time and we're looking at history and we're looking at kind of racial prejudice in the police force within the 70s and the 80s, racism in the police force is a mimic of racism in society. So if society is
Mm.
overtly racist, then police, they might cling on to those kind of racial tropes. That's kind of
Yep.
my opinion on police and the triggerings, I guess.
Definitely. Yeah, no, that makes sense. Because as you said, it is the force that is meant to, and in America it's protect and serve, but here, it's still meant to protect. I think the history of policing in this country probably, says a lot as to why black people aren't being protected by this force. But as you've said, you have the McPherson report, which comes out after Stephen Lawrence's death, and his murder, which is not taken seriously by the police force and not investigated properly. And McPherson says institutionally racist police force, okay. Um, and then, following on from that, the recommendations are made, but are they implemented? And that's my problem with all these reports. If we think about policing, there are like tens of reports on this police incident or the London Met here or what they did at this point or in reaction to the riots or whatever. And I just feel like the recommendations, are they ever implemented? And then who follows up? Who checks in? Like, who are they responsible for to? Because I feel like the government can't be held responsible because, things that the Home Office are doing are also just as systemically racist as the police force. So I just feel like, as you said, who are the police answering to? And of course, they answer to independent watchdogs and committees, but are they really independent? Because they don't seem to be riding for black people at all, or poor people in many ways, and different groups.
Most definitely. When you're looking at like Scarman report and all the kind of stuff there, he was probably like an apologist for the government in a way. When
Yeah.
you look, I read through like a lot of the stuff he'll say in the report. He says that racial prejudice does exist amongst some officers, but again
Mm.
rejects that the
Yeah,
institution is a well, the institution is an institution racist organization, and
definitely.
evidence says otherwise. But even so, as well, when you're looking at the police, when we're looking at a lot of stuff they implemented in the past, even going back to before you have the mass migration of people from the African diaspora, from the black diaspora, the Bankruptcy
Yeah,
Act 1824 or the SUS laws, which again was used back in Victorian Britain to harass, a lot of the poor people,
yeah,
a lot of people that were on the streets. So again, they've been historically always been an institution that's oppressed the
definitely.
oppressed people, the bottom of society. And
Definitely. Yeah.
yeah, it's interesting to see how they kind of use that legislation to harass a lot of the black people in the 70s under the use of sus as well, which I found
Mm,
incredibly interesting. What the police
of
were like.
course. Yeah, sus laws. It's like sus has been replaced with like the stop and search laws of today.
Yeah,
Everything is just repackaged and re-pushed out to oppress people all over again, as we kind of think about it in a modern context, definitely. I also was thinking about the point you said about Scarman kind of saying, it's a few officers with racial prejudice and this idea that there's a few bad apples and, oh, if you just root out the bad apples. But I think the whole tree is rotten, for, to carry on the analogy. And I think, as we've said, it's systemic. It's not just, if you got rid of every single police officer, I still think you'd still have a potentially institutionally racist police force because that is a system. And that's a system of Britain. It's not just the police as a bad kind of example. There's racism in football, there's racism in schooling system, in healthcare, medical racism. It's like so widespread. And then to see something like that Sewell report that came out earlier this year to tell me that Britain is not institutionally racist anymore. Right.
even that report as well. I've never, from when you have the prime minister that makes such remarks like that, makes
Honestly.
remarks that he says, and then you go around and say that the Britain's not,
Yeah.
oh gosh. So we could spend all day talking about that report there because I wasn't
Yeah.
really a fan. And again, he's kind of like still like the government's token black friend that they kind of
Yeah,
use
definitely.
to
Of
always
course.
push their agenda.
Mm-hmm.
So that's another story for another day.
Definitely. It really is. And I think nearly every podcast I've done with a guest in the past few weeks, we've brought that up somehow because it's just so ridiculous. I think my final point on reports has got to be this idea that all the reports that seem to suggest there's racism or prejudice and that something needs to be done, they get silenced very quickly. Maureen Kane, I mentioned, Society and the Policeman's Role, 1973, very much underused, was pretty much ignored when it was first published. Joseph Hunt, Nigger Hunting in England, sorry to say that word, but 1966, he literally details of the police going, quote unquote, nigger hunting. That is the terminology they used before they would go on patrol. They were looking specifically for black people. Another report that was widely dismissed and just kind of pushed to the side, whereas you have this report like the Saul report that everyone's like, oh yeah, no institutional racism, ha ha ha, fantastic. Why is that one kind of taken up so strongly and so believable when all these other ones, the Windrush report from 2020, and all these other ones that we probably don't even know about because they've been pushed aside so far. Why aren't they listened to?
Yeah, and I like the kind of the point you make about the Joseph Hunt with the digger hunting book. Sorry
Mm,
again, because that was something that was particularly evident in Liverpool. They used to have like
yeah,
these something called coon races, where it's like they'd put
absolutely.
money in a pot, and whoever could grab the most, guess the most black people, the rest of the most black people on the day would have that money as
It's
well.
disgusting.
Yeah, so that's what the police are on.
Yeah, well,
In a
exactly.
way,
And you have evidence of this.
yeah,
That's what I
exactly.
don't. And it's like, oh no, it's not a problem. What they're doing is absolutely fine. And yeah, yeah, right. I think we've taken this to a place of no return. And I think we're going to wrap up with some closing remarks about protesting racism and all that kind of stuff, and thinking about it within today's context or historically, if you'd like. So I have a few questions for you. Protesting today, is it all performative? Do you think it works? Does it have an impact? And you can think about 1980s or now if you'd rather.
I think today now, in this kind of whole age of social media, I don't think it has any meaning. Like it's lost
Okay.
that kind of way now. I think people just want to go to show Instagram or
Mm,
Twitter that they went to the protest and that they and I
mm,
think um when I went to the protest, I kind of realized, yeah, this is the last time I kind of do these protests. I want to
fair
make
enough.
real change.
Yeah.
I don't want to do with the problem, I want to do with the solution. That's the kind
Yeah.
of how I see life in a way. And even so, when we're looking at, as historians, when we're looking at protests historically, when you look at the civil rights movement, the African American history, you
Mm,
know, they protest, they got the civil rights passed, well, the Civil Rights Act in 1964, Voting Rights Act in 1965. But what change really happened there? They got the
yeah.
voting, desegregation, but in a way, you could argue that the Black American experience kind of regressed past that there as
Absolutely.
well. And I feel the real thing that King couldn't get, the real thing that what God was pushing for, that Malcolm X was pushing for, and the whole Nation of Islam, and a lot of other these groups was economic power. You
Mm-hmm.
know, that's why when you're looking at when King after King spoke about Vietnam War and the poor man, and then he tried to do the poor man's campaign and so on and so forth. You see how he tried to get the black and whites together to fight for economic power.
Yeah.
The poor white people and the poor black people and the black community in general. So I feel like not even maybe. I feel like economic power is probably economics is just something that
Mm,
black economics is something that I'm really interested in the
yeah,
future,
of course.
and just kind of just uplifting my people in particular. And again,
Definitely.
black economics doesn't mean that you don't support any other race. Come on,
Mm-hmm.
that's not what we
Yeah.
mean. But
You know this.
in the black community, what do we own? We own
Yeah.
food stores or hair shops. We can
Mm-hmm.
go to Asian high streets and they've got like blanks, they've got all these different things here. But yeah, back to
Definitely.
the point now. When they're protesting, I feel that's something that I'm gonna leave in the past. I feel like I want to be in the places where I can make real change, whether that's the
Yeah.
boardroom meetings or you know speaking to people high up, ministers. I mean, like yeah, MPs and so on and so forth. So that's my
Definitely.
opinion on that. There.
That makes sense. Absolutely. I think it is important to kind of I think maybe protest can be the start but never the end. You can't go to that protest, go home, put your picture on Instagram and feel really proud of yourself. You've made a start. One thing I will say about protests though, the energy you get from them. I think if I went to like a protest every week before I started like work, I would be so spurned on by Monday because they are very motivational. They're tiring and you're drained. Um, but I think they can be so kind of not hype building, but they really do hype you up to potentially take on whatever you need to take on. And as you said, get into those boardrooms, get into those conversations at them tables where the decisions are being made and have an impact there, definitely. I like the point you made about protests kind of leading to legislation change potentially in the case of America. And maybe that is kind of protesting's only, well, not only, but one of the main kind of benefits of them if we have a legislation that needs to be changed,
Mm,
using a protest to do that and kind of create awareness about it, is probably one of the best ways to do that maybe. Okay, you touched on social media, but I want to ask, Do you think social media and the kind of activism we see on there helps or hinders kind of movements for racial equality or anti-racist protests and things like that?
I think, well, firstly, you know what? Before I go with that one there, I wanted to
Mm.
say again, I'm not against protest in a way and BLM
Of
protest.
course, yeah.
I want to, you know, the reason why I kind of said that is because I think the moment Boris kind of opened up the country, everyone's going
Mm.
back to Shubs's.
Yep,
No one cared. That's the only reason why I was like, cool.
definitely.
And again, nothing's changed since a year on. But other than that, you know, big up the protest and all that stuff there. But the social media help or hinder. I think with social media sometimes with protests and that, yeah, you look when you look at it, I think it's a success in the way where it kind of is able to galvanize people and how. And you know, when we look at that BLM, well, with the murder of George Floyd and kind
Yeah.
of how it was kind of happened in Britain as well, it was like over like 3 4 days. I remember
Mm.
it just seeing so much things being spread. Boom, 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 boom. Activism. Everyone's getting together. You know, you had the Blackout Tuesday, then the protests were announced for the Friday. It was. I think it's a help.
Yeah,
I believe in the way social media. Again, though, I think the issues with social media is sometimes they can just spread false information. You know,
definitely.
they can post a lot of like pseudo history. If you
Mm.
follow like a lot of these different pages that just post random stuff, don't want to get into pages or people, but you know, in that respect, it does have a hindrance. But again,
Yeah,
you know, if you follow the right people, or not if you follow the right
definitely.
people, but you know, if your timeline is good, or you know, you see some good stuff being posted alongside,
Yeah.
yeah, it's I think it's a help in a way, in my opinion.
Definitely. I think it can help reach people that wouldn't necessarily be reached by, seeing a protest. Social media is, as you said, something that if you have that correct timeline and you're on it a lot, you are going to take in and absorb a lot of that information, even like kind of subconsciously. And so, yeah, I agree with you in saying that social media can really help. But this misinformation, and there's a lot of it, and I feel like I've seen Instagram and Twitter as well, like if you try and retweet an article without having clicked the link, they'll say, do you want to read this article first? Which is helpful in a way. It's another step to kind of slow your brain down with just resharing things that look correct because they're from maybe someone who has a lot of followers or someone who has spoken about something before. So yeah, I can see social media's helpfulness and its hindrances. Definitely, as you said, I completely agree. And the final question I think I have for you, unless you have anything else you'd like to say or share, is how should we look back then historically at riots, protests, and uprisings? Let's take 1981 for a case. As a public, shall we say, outside of academia, how is it best to kind of remember these events? Is it something that needs to kind of be not necessarily memorialized, but written about, spoken about, documentaries? Is that the way that we kind of look back at these riots and protests? Or is it thinking about the legacy of them and maybe what they changed or didn't?
It's a good question. I think
Thank you.
one, I think one good way to look at it is that you know, black people we were never submissive to
Yeah,
racism. That's one thing we should never look at. Like, yo, we fought back.
100%. Yeah.
We tried, whether it was try go legislations. We
Mm,
tried whether it was with these groups. You had like the scrap sus committee. I think it
yeah.
was it George, but was it Paul Bolting? He was a part of it. He was a Labour MP for Bristol and a lawyer as well. So we had all these different community activists. And sometimes if violence really emerges. So again, I think it's one way to look at it is that we've never been a docile people. We've never been submissive. We've never stood
Absolutely.
there and just watched injustices happen. We've fought back, whether that being through, as I said, campaigns and organisings, or whether that being unfortunately, well, not even unfortunately, through violent means. Because sometimes, as Malcolm X says, by any means necessary.
Yeah,
And we have to look at, when we look back at these uprisings, I think we can look back and just say it was a pivotal moment in Black British history. You know, this is a moment where we really, I guess we kind of just like ran police out or showed them what was
definitely.
happening. That's actually an interesting one as well. When you're looking at, I think, Notting Hill Carnival 1976, where
Hmm.
that was probably one of the first case studies of Black British community fighting back violently. When they
Yeah.
came, before police would come to Carney and catch wines,
Yeah.
and have a good time, they were really out there,
Yeah, they
stern
were.
face, bad vibes,
Negative
punching up you,
energy.
negative energy,
Yeah,
punching up youths, and
terrible.
then that was one of the case studies that I really love, where it's like, they fought back violently because
Yeah.
if you're seeing five officers punching up one little black you, are you really
Hmm.
gonna stand there
Exactly.
and
And
just watch that?
watch.
You know what I mean? So I think we can look back with pride with, I guess the community uprisings,
Yeah,
and just seeing how, I guess, the black community really fought back. And yeah,
definitely.
hopefully it should be documented more,
Yeah, for sure.
um, with maybe some documentaries, because they had a real good one on BBC One. It was about resistance. I think it was like
Yeah,
resistance against racism. I think I can't remember how long ago it was. It's like an hour and a half, but yeah, it's a good documentary. But
definitely.
yeah, I think looking back at it with pride and just document our history in the right way. That's one thing
I
I'll say.
agree. Definitely. Definitely agree with all those points. And I think just to add, just came to my mind, there's a documentary called Hands with Songs by Jana Comfra. And that was following, I think it was 1984 riots in Handsworth,
Hmm.
but had elements of 1981 as well. And it has footage, it has interviews, and it's a really good kind of visual way of understanding the riots. And the fact that it's about Handsworth, which is obviously Birmingham and not London, is also really, really interesting that that's the angle they took, and really helpful as well to understanding these histories outside of London.
Yeah, that's
Definitely.
sweet. I'll check that one out there still.
Yeah, it's a good one, definitely. I think that is everything that we aimed to speak about today in regards to protesting racism. I think potentially there might be, you might, if you see another episode about racism and protesting, then you know it's a series. And if you don't, then decided to end it here. Haven't decided yet. I'm a little bit indecisive this week, but I think it would be interesting to look in depth maybe at one of the cities in particular, and kind of how that started, just to kind of give you as listeners that maybe don't know the history so well context of these uprisings, and you know all the ins and outs of why they were, shall we say, important, and people kind of cared so much at that point to take it to the streets. So Montel, thank you so much for being on the podcast this week. Honestly, it's been a true pleasure to have you on, and to kind of hear your perspective and all the research you've done. I'm sure your dissertation is going to be absolutely fantastic, because
Thank you.
you know the wealth of sources, and reading that has gone into it all. Dissertations are just, they're mad. They're a lot, but yeah, it will be so worth it.
Oh
Thinking
man,
about all the things you've
thank you
talked
so much
about
for having
today.
me. Big fan of
No
big
worries
fan.
at all.
So yeah, man, this has been dope, man. Thank you again.
Anytime, right? Let us know, where do we find you? What are your socials? The your magazine, your music magazine. Tell us about all of that before you go, so any fans you've developed during this episode can check you out later.
Yeah, so Nostalgia 99, my music magazine is a bit stagnated at the moment, because of uni, but we're back on it,
Of
back
course,
with the blog and all and so on and so forth. Magazine sold out, I'm afraid, unfortunately, but
no
however,
worries. Next
should be
one,
having next one should be
yep,
coming end of the year, early next year, so watch out for that.
fantastic.
So yeah, follow it on Instagram, it's Nostalgia 99, Nostalgia 9, letter T 9, and then my personal Instagram, you can find me at Montel triple underscore on Instagram. Yeah, that's all. I'm
No,
very hard
honestly,
at plugging myself. I try to let the work do the answer, let the work do
yeah,
the talking. But
you've got to do it. You have to plug yourself
that's all I gotta say,
always.
really.
And as you said, your work will speak for you. But please do follow Montel if you are interested in things he is, and you want to hear what he has to say about, music, the police, protesting racism, and all that good stuff, historically and otherwise. And I'd just like to say thank you for listening to this episode of the History Hotline. A little bit longer than normal. However, I hope you enjoyed it, because we had a lot of juicy things to talk about. Please stay tuned for the next 2 or 3 maybe episodes that will look more specifically and in depth at the 1981 riots, probably starting with Brixton, as that's where it all kicked off, moving into some regional histories, looking at places in Birmingham or further north like Liverpool and Leeds. So thank you so much for listening. Montel, thank you for
This has been
joining
dope,
us
man.
on
Thank you
the
again.
podcast today. Have a wonderful week, everyone. Goodbye.